Caving isn't for everyone. The fear isn't of falling. It's the moment you realize the silence down there isn't empty. It's listening. And you're crawling through spaces that haven't seen light in millions of years, where your headlamp is the only thing between you and absolute darkness. Welcome, sleepy wanderer. I'm here to guide you into restful sleep with dark, soothing, horror caving stories. Before we begin, subscribe so I can be here every night you need me. Like this video and comment with your location and what story I should tell next. Now relax and let the darkness carry you away. The Gulf Coast of Florida, where the limestone has been carved out by millennia of water flow into a labyrinth of submerged passages. I had been cave diving for 12 years. I was a certified technical diver, a rebreather specialist, and I'd mapped more underwater caves than anyone else in the state. I was supposed to have a dive buddy. That's rule number 1. Never dive alone. My partner had called me at 4 that afternoon. The flu, high fever, couldn't make it. The problem was the tide. The entrance to the unmapped chamber we were targeting was only accessible during a specific window of low slack tide. 4 hours. If we missed it, we'd have to wait another month for the conditions to align again. I'd been planning this dive for 6 months. I'd studied the satellite data, analyzed the water flow patterns, calculated the optimal entry time down to the minute. I made the call. I'd go alone. Just this once. I spent an hour at the dock checking my equipment. My rebreather was a closed-circuit system, top of the line, worth $12,000. It recycled my exhaled breath, scrubbed out the carbon dioxide, added oxygen as needed. It was virtually silent underwater. No bubbles, no noise, just me and the darkness. I checked my dive computer 5 times. New equipment. The latest model with real-time nitrogen tracking and GPS waypoint markers. I verified the oxygen mix, tested the mouthpiece seal, confirmed my backup systems. Everything was perfect. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have such reliable gear, how nothing could go wrong with technology this advanced. I was wrong about that. The water was dark green near the surface, but it turned to absolute black within 20 feet. I descended slowly, equalizing the pressure in my ears every few feet, watching the depth gauge climb. 30 feet, 50 feet, 70. The water temperature dropped gradually, stabilizing at 72 degrees. Perfect conditions. Clear water, no current. This was going to be textbook. At 90 feet, I reached the mouth of the cave system. The entrance was a narrow crack in the limestone, barely wide enough for a person with full gear. I'd seen the sonar scans dozens of times. Beyond this restriction, the passage opened into a larger tunnel that led to the unmapped chamber. The chamber that might connect to 3 other known systems, potentially creating the largest underwater cave network in the Western Hemisphere. I squeezed through the restriction, feeling the rocks scrape against my tanks. My primary light cut through the darkness ahead, illuminating pale limestone walls covered in delicate formations. Curtains of flowstone that looked like frozen waterfalls. Tiny stalactites that looked like teeth. Beautiful. Untouched. I was the first human being to see this in possibly thousands of years. The tunnel angled downward. 100 feet. 110. 120. The silence down there is different from any silence on the surface. It's absolute. Complete. Your heartbeat becomes the loudest thing in the world. Every breath through the rebreather is a mechanical rhythm. Hiss, pause, click, pause, hiss. I'd done this so many times it was meditative, calming. That's when I heard it. A gasp. Wet, labored. Human, coming through my rebreather line. I stopped mid-swim, hovering in the water, my heart suddenly hammering in my chest. I held my breath, listening. The rebreather system was silent, except for the soft hiss of oxygen being added to the loop. There was no one else down here. There couldn't be. I checked the entry log. No other divers had accessed this system in 3 weeks. The gasp came again. Closer this time. Not outside the mouthpiece. Inside it. Like someone was sharing my regulator, exhaling cold breath directly into my lungs. I could taste it. Metallic. Old. Like water that had been sitting in copper pipes for decades. My training kicked in. I went through the mental checklist. System failure. Possible leak. Water contamination. Carbon dioxide buildup causing hallucinations. I checked the loop hoses, ran my fingers along every connection point, feeling for bubbles, for moisture, for any sign of malfunction. No leaks. No moisture. The system was functioning perfectly. My oxygen mix was at exactly 21%. My carbon dioxide scrubber was green across the board. But the sound continued. Rhythmic now. In and out. Breathing that wasn't my own. And it was getting closer. Not moving through the water, just closer. Like something was approaching through the darkness, drawn to my presence. I switched on my backup light and scanned the tunnel around me. The water was crystal clear. Visibility was easily 60 feet in every direction. The limestone walls stretched ahead and behind. Empty. Nothing there. No other divers, no equipment malfunction. Nothing that could explain what I was hearing. The temperature dropped. I could feel it through my 7mm wetsuit, a sudden, bone-deep cold that made me shiver. The water in this system was usually a constant 72 degrees. Thermal springs kept it warm year-round. Now it felt like ice water was seeping through the neoprene, directly against my skin. My dive computer confirmed it. 68 degrees. 65. Dropping fast. I made the decision to abort the dive, turn around, get out. This wasn't worth it. 6 months of planning didn't matter. Something was wrong. Trust your instincts. That's what my first instructor had told me. If something feels off, abort. Always abort. That's when my primary light flickered and died. I slapped it twice, the standard underwater troubleshooting procedure. Nothing. Complete darkness. I switched to my backup light, a smaller but still powerful LED torch clipped to my shoulder strap. It came on immediately, and in that brief moment of transition between lights, in that fraction of a second when both were off, I saw something. A faint, luminescent blue outline. Humanoid. Tall. Maybe 7 feet. Wavering in the water current like kelp. Except there was no current down here. The water was perfectly still. The outline was watching me. I couldn't see features, couldn't make out details, but I knew with absolute certainty that it was looking directly at me. Into me. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. I kicked hard, spinning in the water, orienting myself back toward the entrance tunnel. My fins churned through the water. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps that echoed through the mouthpiece. The breathing sound was still there, matching my rhythm, like something was synchronized with my panic. I could feel something behind me. Not following, that would imply distance. This was matching my speed exactly, staying just outside the cone of my light. When I kicked harder, it kept pace. When I slowed to navigate around a rock formation, it slowed. But I never saw it, never heard it splash, just felt its presence like a cold pressure against my spine. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Had I come this far? The rock formations looked different. The flowstone curtains were in the wrong positions. There was a boulder I didn't remember passing. And the walls were closing in, narrowing when I knew they should be opening up toward the restriction point. But I couldn't stop to figure it out. I just swam harder, my legs burning, my breathing rate climbing dangerously high. I was consuming oxygen too fast. Panic breathing, the worst thing you can do underwater. I reached what I thought was the restriction point, the narrow crack that led back to the open water. I squeezed through, scraping my shoulders raw against the limestone. The pain didn't matter. I just needed out. Out of this tunnel, out of this water, out of whatever space I'd violated by being here. I kicked upward, watching my depth gauge fall. 110 feet. 100. 90. My computer was beeping. Warning alerts. Ascent rate too fast. Decompression obligation increasing. I didn't care. I'd deal with the bends on the surface if I had to. Anything was better than staying down here. At 70 feet, training overrode panic. I forced myself to stop. Decompression. If I surfaced too fast from this depth, the nitrogen dissolved in my blood would come out of solution, form bubbles. The bends. I could die, or worse, end up paralyzed from the waist down, spending the rest of my life in a wheelchair trying to explain to doctors what I'd seen. I hovered there in the open water, forced to wait, staring down into the black mouth of the cave system. My backup light was dimming, batteries dying faster than they should. The breathing sound through my mouthpiece had stopped. Everything was quiet. Normal. Just the soft hiss of my rebreather and the pounding of my heart. After 3 minutes of decompression, I continued up. 50 feet. 30. 20. The surface glittered above me like a promise of salvation. I could see the hull of my boat, a dark shadow against the lighter water. Safety. 15 more feet. At 15 feet, according to my dive computer, there was an air pocket, a small chamber where the cave ceiling rose above water level. I'd seen it on the sonar maps. It was a standard decompression stop location, documented by previous divers. Safe. I surfaced into it, breaking through the water, pulling myself up onto a small limestone shelf, barely 2 feet wide. The air smelled wrong. Metallic. Thick. Like breathing in coins. I ripped off my mask, gasping, and that's when I heard it one final time. A calm, clear whisper. Not from the water. Not from the cave. From my mouthpiece, still in my mouth. "You're late." The voice was conversational, matter-of-fact, like someone reminding me of an appointment I'd forgotten. A man's voice. Deep. Patient. The kind of voice that expected to be obeyed. I tore the regulator from my mouth and immediately choked. The smell hit me like a physical blow. Salt water. Thick, concentrated brine. The kind that burns your nostrils and makes your eyes water. I looked around the air pocket, shining my dying light on the walls. Water droplets covered every surface, glistening, dripping. Too much moisture. Way too much. The air pocket wasn't air. It was aerosolized salt water. Dense, supersaturated, somehow held in suspension at the top of the chamber by forces I couldn't understand. But I'd been breathing. For how long? I checked my dive computer. The display was glitching, numbers flickering. Then it stabilized. 45 minutes. I'd been in the air pocket for 45 minutes and 17 seconds. That was impossible. I'd surfaced less than 30 seconds ago. I remembered pulling myself onto the shelf, remembered removing my mask. That was seconds ago, not 45 minutes. Panic took over completely. Real panic. Not the manageable fear I'd felt in the tunnel. This was existential terror. Something had happened to time. Something had happened to me. I jammed the mouthpiece back in, switched to my emergency oxygen supply, and swam for the exit. No more decompression stops. No more protocol. I had enough oxygen to reach the surface. That's all that mattered. When I finally broke the surface under the stars, I couldn't feel my hands, couldn't feel my legs. My body was there, responding to commands but disconnected, numb. I dragged myself onto the dive platform and lay there, shaking so violently my teeth rattled. The night air felt like fire against my skin. Back on shore, wrapped in blankets, drinking coffee that tasted like ash, I downloaded my dive computer's log. The detailed record of depth, time, and oxygen consumption that every modern dive computer maintains, legally required, admissible in court, objective data. The data showed I'd entered the air pocket at 15 feet and stayed there, breathing, moving around, for exactly 45 minutes and 17 seconds, without my regulator, without my rebreather, breathing salt water like it was air. The computer showed my respiratory rate, normal, steady, calm, 12 breaths per minute, the same rate I maintained during meditation exercises. I had no memory of those 45 minutes, not a single second, just the moment of surfacing and the immediate terror. Everything in between was gone, erased. I sold all my diving equipment the next week, thousands of dollars of gear, posted it online for half price, sold it in 2 days to a dive shop in Tampa. I moved to Colorado, Denver, as far from the ocean as I could get while staying in the continental United States. I still wake up sometimes, gasping, with the taste of salt water in my mouth and the sound of someone else breathing through my lungs. I've tried therapy, 3 different therapists. None of them understand. How could they? I don't understand. The dive computer is in a drawer somewhere. I can't bring myself to throw it away. Evidence. Proof that something happened, even if I can't explain what. Sometimes I think about that voice. You're late. Late for what? An appointment I never made? A meeting I never scheduled? Or maybe I did show up. Maybe those 45 missing minutes were the appointment, and something down there made sure I kept it. I just wish I could remember what I agreed to. August 7th, 11:20 in the morning. The Chihuahuan Desert of New Mexico, where ancient lava flows had carved out a network of tubes and passages beneath the scrubland. I was a third-year geology graduate student at New Mexico Tech, specializing in volcanic geomorphology. 23 years old, reasonably experienced in fieldwork, confident in my abilities. I'd been assigned to collect rock core samples from a rarely accessed section of the El Malpais lava tube system. My professor, Dr. Raymond Kowalski, needed samples from specific mineral layers that were only exposed in the deepest sections, the kind of work that required someone who could handle both the technical drilling equipment and the isolation of solo cave work. I'd done this before, dozens of times, different caves across New Mexico and Arizona. I actually liked the solitude. No awkward small talk with field partners who didn't understand the science. No explaining my methodology to someone who kept interrupting with questions. Just me, the rock, and the quiet hum of the core drill. Peaceful, meditative. The hike to the entrance took 40 minutes across broken volcanic terrain. The August heat was brutal above ground, 103 degrees. My field thermometer was reading surface temperatures high enough to cook an egg on the black basalt. But I knew once I descended into the lava tube, the temperature would drop to a constant 55 degrees. Standard geothermal gradient. I was prepared. Thick coveralls over moisture-wicking base layers, helmet with mounted LED array, 3 backup lights, 2 liters of water, energy bars, GPS locator beacon clipped to my belt with a carabiner, and my handheld voice recorder. A cheap little digital unit I'd bought at an electronics store for $30. Nothing fancy, just a simple record button and playback. I used it to log observations, note interesting formations, keep track of sample locations and GPS coordinates. It was easier than writing in a field notebook with dirty gloves. The entrance was a collapse pit, a skylight where part of the lava tube's roof had caved in millennia ago. Classic formation. The collapse created an opening about 15 feet wide, with a fixed rope anchored to rebar drilled into solid rock. Previous survey teams had installed it years ago. I tested the rope, tugged hard. Solid. Safe. I rappelled down on the fixed line, 50 feet straight down into darkness. When my boots hit the tube floor, I clicked on my helmet light and started walking. The temperature drop was immediate, from 100 degrees to 55 in the space of a 30-second descent. The air smelled ancient, mineral, dead. No organic scent at all. No moisture, no life. Just stone that had been cooling for millions of years. The passage was huge, 30 feet wide in places, 15 feet tall. The walls were smooth, glassy basalt, frozen mid-flow like a snapshot of liquid rock. Volcanic processes had created these tubes when lava drained away, leaving hollow passages behind. My footsteps echoed. The acoustics were strange, bouncing and distorting in ways that made it hard to judge distance. I was heading for Section 7B, marked on my GPS as being 2.3 kilometers into the system. The sampling site was indicated by a red X painted on the wall by Dr. Kowalski during his initial survey 3 years ago. Standard practice. Mark your sampling sites with spray paint so you can find them again. The walk took 30 minutes. I passed through several chambers, some as large as gymnasiums. I navigated around boulder collapses where chunks of ceiling had fallen centuries ago. I squeezed through one tight restriction where the ceiling lowered to barely 3 feet, forcing me to crawl on my belly, dragging my sample case behind me. Standard caving, nothing unusual, nothing that worried me. Except my voice recorder kept dying. The first time it happened, I thought I'd just forgotten to charge it. I'd clicked it on to make a note about an interesting columnar jointing pattern in the wall, and within seconds, the battery indicator had dropped to 0. Dead. Just like that. I replaced the batteries, brand new Duracells from a fresh pack, clicked the recorder on, started describing the formation. 5 seconds later, dead again. I tried a different set of batteries, same result. By the time I reached Section 7B, I'd burned through 6 sets of batteries, all of them dying within seconds of activation. I'd given up on the recorder. Minor frustration, annoying but not dangerous. I'd just rely on my written field notes and photographs. The sampling site was exactly where the GPS said it would be. A small alcove where the main lava tube branched off into a smaller side passage, maybe 8 feet wide. And there, on the wall, was the red X. Bright red spray paint. Still vivid after 3 years because nothing ever faded down here. No sunlight, no weather, no oxidation. Time moved differently underground. I set up my portable core drill, battery-powered, diamond bit, designed specifically for field work. The unit weighed about 30 pounds fully loaded. I'd carried it in my sample case along with the collection tubes and labeling equipment. The sample location required drilling horizontally into the wall, collecting a cylinder of rock about 4 inches deep and 1 inch in diameter. Standard core sampling procedure. I'd done this hundreds of times in my academic career. The drill bit into the basalt with a high-pitched whine that echoed through the chamber. Rock dust plumed out, fine and black. I had to pause twice to let it settle, waiting for visibility to clear. The dust hung in the air longer than it should have. No air circulation at all down here. Just dead, still atmosphere. After 15 minutes of careful drilling, I had my first core sample. Perfect. Clean extraction.
No breaks or fractures.
I sealed it in a labeled plastic tube with the GPS coordinates, depth, and timestamp written on medical tape. Standard protocol. Then I packed it carefully in my sample case, cushioned with foam inserts. According to my assignment sheet, I needed a second sample from a different mineral layer about 20 feet further down the side passage. Dr. Kowalski's notes indicated a visible color transition in the basalt, darker on the lower layer, indicating different cooling rates or chemical composition. That's what we were studying: volcanic evolution over time. I picked up my gear and walked deeper into the side tunnel. The passage narrowed, the ceiling lowered. My helmet scraped rock twice. After about 50 feet, the tunnel dead-ended at a collapse. Large boulders, ancient and settled, covered in fine dust. Impassable without excavation equipment. I marked the location on my GPS, took my second core sample from an exposed vein of darker basalt visible near the collapse, and turned to head back to the main tube. When I reached the alcove where I'd taken my first sample, I stopped. The red X was gone. Not faded, not partially visible. Gone. Completely erased. In its place, scratched deep into the basalt with something sharp and metal, was a fresh symbol. The grooves were bright, almost white, where fresh rock had been exposed. Chalky dust still clung to the carved lines, drifting down in small cascades as I watched. The symbol was geometric, a circle with jagged lines radiating outward. 12 lines, evenly spaced, like a clock face. But the lines were broken, segmented, irregular. A broken clock face. I stood there, staring, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. I ran my fingers over the carving. The grooves were deep, at least a quarter inch into the solid rock. The edges were sharp, fresh. This had been carved recently, minutes ago, while I'd been 50 feet away in the side passage. My first rational thought was another person, someone else in the system. But that didn't make sense. I would have heard them. Sound carried forever down here. I would have seen their light. I would have felt their presence in the narrow passage as we passed each other. And who would be carving symbols in the dark? Why? I pulled out my map and Dr. Kowalski's original survey notes. He'd clearly documented a red X at this exact location. GPS coordinates: 34.8821 degrees north, 108.0456 degrees west. Verified with handheld GPS unit and photographic documentation. I checked my GPS. Same coordinates. Exact match. This was section 7B. This was the location. But the X was gone. Replaced. While I'd been alone. The symbol on the wall gleamed in my headlamp beam. Fresh. New. Watching me. I tried to think logically. Maybe I was at the wrong alcove. Maybe there were multiple side passages in this section and I'd gotten turned around. It happens. Even with GPS, underground navigation can be disorienting. But no. This was the place. I'd left my equipment case here. I could see the scrape marks in the dust where I'd set down the drill. This was the exact spot. I decided to follow my tape markers back to the entrance, standard caving practice. On the way in, I'd placed bright orange reflective tape every 100 feet on the wall, arrows drawn in permanent marker pointing back toward the exit. Breadcrumb trail. Basic safety protocol that every caver learns. I found the first marker easily, 20 feet back in the main tube. But the arrow was pointing the wrong way, deeper into the system, not toward the entrance. I examined it closely. Same tape, same permanent marker, same handwriting. My handwriting. But reversed, pointing inward instead of outward. My stomach dropped. I walked to the second marker. Same thing, arrow reversed. And then I found a third marker that I hadn't placed. Older tape, faded orange, almost yellow. The adhesive was brittle, cracking.
This marker was years old, and it was leading into a passage that branched off to my right.
A passage I hadn't walked through on the way in. I would have remembered. The entrance was a tight squeeze, barely 2 feet wide. I would have noticed it. I stood at the branch point, shining my light into both passages. The main tube continued straight ahead. The side passage angled off at 45 degrees. Both looked identical in terms of rock formation and size. I checked my GPS. The device showed my position in the main tube, where I should be. But it also showed my breadcrumb trail, the automatic tracking feature that recorded my route on the way in. According to the GPS, I'd walked through the side passage. The data log was clear. Timestamps, coordinates. I'd entered the side passage at 11:47 a.m. and exited back to the main tube at 12:03 p.m. But I had no memory of it. I remembered walking straight through the main tube, placing my markers, heading directly to Section 7B. No detours, no side passages. I made a decision. Follow the faded old markers. Maybe they led to an alternate exit. Maybe previous survey teams had used this route and it would take me out. The side passage sloped downward, steeply. Within 30 feet, the ceiling dropped and I was on my hands and knees. Within 50 feet, I was on my belly, squirming through a space barely 18 inches high. The rock pressed against my back. My sample case scraped along the floor ahead of me, pushed by my outstretched arms. This was wrong. I hadn't come through here. I would have remembered this. I would have made a note in my field log about a tight crawl this extreme. But I kept going. What choice did I have? I couldn't turn around. The passage was too narrow. I had to keep moving forward. The crawl lasted 10 minutes. Felt like an hour. My shoulders were screaming. My knees were raw despite the coveralls. And then suddenly the passage opened up. A vertical shaft. A chimney dropping straight down into blackness. Perfectly circular, about 4 feet in diameter. I could hear water dripping far below. The sound echoed, suggesting significant depth. My helmet light couldn't reach the bottom, and around the rim of the shaft, every 10 feet, were old tape markers. Dozens of them, years old, faded to pale orange. Some of them were brittle, crumbling when I touched them. But here's what made my blood run cold. These markers had been placed on solid rock. Rock that should have been continuous across what was now the opening of the shaft. I could see where the tape had been attached to stone, but that stone was gone now. The shaft had been cut through it. The markers were attached to nothing, hanging in midair at the edge of the drop, their adhesive still stuck to rock that no longer existed in that location. The shaft had been opened after the markers were placed. Recently. Maybe while I'd been collecting my second sample. The rock itself had been removed, carved away, excavated by something that left no drill marks, no tool scars, no evidence of human activity. I backed away from the shaft, moving carefully, fighting down the panic rising in my chest. I couldn't go down. I needed to find another way out. The main passage, the entrance I'd come through. The collapse pit with the fixed rope. I squeezed back through the tight crawl, every inch feeling like torture. My lungs were burning, my heart was racing. When I finally emerged back into the larger passage, I forced myself to stop and think. Navigation, systematic search, logic. I was a scientist. I could figure this out. I walked in what I thought was the direction of the entrance, counting my steps, marking the wall with my own chalk every 50 paces. New marks, distinct from any previous survey. A trail I could trust because I was creating it in real time. After 20 minutes, I found a familiar formation, a bulbous pillar of flowstone that looked like a melted candle. I'd passed this on the way in. I remembered photographing it because the shape was unusual. Relief flooded through me. I was near the entrance. I had to be. I continued forward and found a tight squeeze, a place where fallen boulders had created a narrow gap. I definitely remembered this. I'd climbed over it on the way in, using handholds in the rock wall. But now there was no way over. The gap was at the bottom. I had to go under. I dropped to my belly and pulled myself through, using my elbows, feeling the rocks scrape my back raw through the coveralls. The gap was maybe 20 inches high, tight, claustrophobic. I had to exhale completely to fit through, feeling the stone compress my ribs. And then I was through, back in the main tube, and I could see it ahead. The collapse pit. Daylight. Beautiful, precious daylight streaming down from the entrance skylight 50 feet above. I didn't walk. I ran. My boots pounded on the stone, my sample case banged against my leg. I didn't care about procedure or protocol or field safety. I just needed out. I climbed the fixed rope so fast I tore the skin on my palms. The friction burned. Blood made the rope slippery. But I kept climbing, hand over hand, boots scrambling against the rock wall, until I burst out into the desert heat and collapsed on the black basalt. It took 20 minutes for my breathing to return to normal. I sat in my truck with the air conditioning blasting, drinking an entire liter of water, trying to make sense of what had happened. Then I remembered the core samples. I pulled them out of my sample case. 2 sealed plastic tubes, both clearly labeled with GPS coordinates, depth measurements, and collection times. Standard procedure, professional documentation. I examined the first sample under my portable field microscope, a small folding unit I kept in the truck's equipment box. 8 times magnification, enough to see crystal structure and mineral composition. The core was normal. Basaltic lava, dark, dense, with visible olivine crystals giving it a slight greenish tint. Exactly what I expected from a 4-million-year-old lava flow in the El Malpais field. I loaded the second core sample into the microscope and adjusted the focus. My hands started shaking. Embedded in the basalt, at a depth of 2.7 inches into the core, clearly visible in cross-section, was a fragment of manufactured material. Polymer plastic. Smooth, uniform, with visible injection molding marks and a partial logo, 3 letters, TEC, embossed in raised relief. The kind of plastic used in consumer electronics housing. Modern electronics. 21st century manufacturing techniques, encased in volcanic rock that had been solid for 4 million years. I sat there in the truck, staring at the sample, my brain trying to find rational explanations. Contamination. The drill bit had picked up plastic debris from somewhere. I'd accidentally introduced modern material into the sample during collection. But no. The plastic was in the center of the core, surrounded completely by solid basalt. No drill marks, no cracks, no entry point. It was embedded in the stone itself, as if it had been there when the lava cooled millions of years before humans existed. I drove back to the university in a daze, handed both samples directly to Dr. Kowalski without explanation, told him I was switching thesis topics, something above ground, maybe sedimentary analysis, definitely not caves, never caves again. He asked me what happened. I couldn't answer, couldn't find words that would make sense. I just left the samples on his desk and walked out. Dr. Kowalski had the second sample analyzed by 3 different labs over the next month. University of Arizona, Los Alamos National Laboratory, U.S. Geological Survey Office in Denver. They all confirmed the same thing. Modern polymer plastic, chemically consistent with acrylonitrile butadiene styrene manufactured in the last 50 years, embedded in basaltic lava formed during the Pliocene epoch, 4 million years ago. The sample is now stored in a secured environmental chamber at New Mexico Tech. Dr. Kowalski refuses to discuss it publicly. He's applied for federal grants to conduct a full excavation of Section 7B, archaeological study, geological anomaly investigation. He wants answers. Every application has been denied. No explanation given, just standardized rejection letters. I finished my degree in sedimentary geology, took a job with an oil company analyzing core samples from drill sites. Surface work, daylight, no caves. I make good money. The work is boring but safe, and I've never been able to explain the photographs. When I finally had the courage to review my field camera's memory card, a month after the incident, I found something I can't rationalize. The camera had automatic timestamping. Every photo tagged with GPS coordinates and precise time down to the second. I have a photograph of the red X on the wall in Section 7B, taken at 12:14 p.m. Clear, perfect focus. The red X is bright and obvious. And I have a photograph from the exact same position, same GPS coordinates, taken at 12:19 p.m., 5 minutes later. The carved symbol is there instead, the broken clock face. But in the second photograph, visible in the glassy basalt wall behind the symbol, is my reflection, holding my camera, taking the picture. Except I'm wearing different clothes, not my field coveralls, older-style caving gear, the kind used in the 1970s, canvas pants, a yellow hard hat with a carbide lamp instead of LED. And I look older, maybe 50. My face is weathered, lined, gray-haired. It's me. I know it's me. Same facial structure, same posture, same way of holding the camera. But it's not me from that day. It's me from a future I haven't lived yet, or a past that never happened. I keep the photograph in a locked drawer. I don't look at it anymore. But sometimes I catch my reflection in unexpected places, store windows, car mirrors, phone screens, and for just a moment, I see myself wearing those old coveralls and that yellow hard hat. And behind me, carved into whatever surface I'm looking at, is that symbol, that broken clock face, reminding me that time underground doesn't work the same way it does up here, and that whatever I encountered in Section 7B isn't finished with me yet. November 4th, 3 in the morning. An unmapped section of abandoned mine shaft beneath downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I was a geotechnical surveyor contracted by the city's Department of Public Works. 42 years old. 20 years of experience in subsurface mapping. I thought I'd seen everything the earth could show me. They were planning a major construction project downtown. A new subway line connecting the north side to Oakland. $30 million. 2 years of construction. But the historical records showed that the area had been extensively mined in the late 1800s for coal and iron ore. Pittsburgh was built on top of mines. Everyone knew that. The problem was, nobody knew exactly how extensive the mine system was. Maps had been lost in the Great Fire of 1953. Shafts had been sealed and forgotten. The city needed to know what was under their feet before they started digging with heavy machinery. That's where I came in. I specialized in subsurface mapping using ground-penetrating sonar, heavy equipment, sensitive instruments, the kind of work that required silence and complete isolation because any interference, another person moving, talking, breathing too heavily, could corrupt the data. Even footsteps could throw off the readings by several feet. So I worked alone, at night, when the city above was as quiet as it ever got, when traffic stopped, when construction crews went home, when the urban noise floor dropped to its minimum. I had a secret that I'd never told my employers, never told anyone who might use it against me professionally. I was claustrophobic, deeply, irrationally terrified of enclosed spaces, had been since childhood. When I was 7 years old, My older brother had locked me in a closet, a prank that went wrong. He'd forgotten I was there, gone outside to play basketball with friends. I'd been trapped in pitch darkness for 3 hours, screaming until my voice gave out, pounding on the door until my hands were bruised, convinced I was going to die in there. My parents found me eventually, but the damage was done. For years afterward, I couldn't sleep without a light on, couldn't ride in elevators, couldn't even close the bathroom door completely. But I'd become a surveyor anyway, because I was stubborn, and because the pay was excellent, and because I'd developed coping mechanisms over the years. Cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure therapy, breathing exercises, and my main personal technique, humming. Specific songs, cheerful, stupid songs that filled up the silence and kept my mind occupied. Songs from childhood, TV show themes, commercial jingles. Anything with a bright, bouncy melody that was impossible to feel scared while humming. Tonight I was humming the theme song from an old sitcom, one I'd watched with my family every Friday night when I was a kid. Bright, upbeat, optimistic. The kind of tune that made you think everything would work out okay. The mine entrance was hidden in the basement of an abandoned building scheduled for demolition, an old department store that had closed in the 80s. The city had given me access with a master key and a liability waiver that basically said if anything happened to me, it was my own fault. I descended through a series of wooden ladders, old and creaking but structurally sound according to the building inspector who checked them 2 days prior. Down through what had once been a ventilation shaft. The ladder rungs were hand-carved, worn smooth by a century of use. At the bottom, about 60 feet below street level, the mine opened up into a larger tunnel. Timber supports, square-cut and massive, holding up tons of earth and rock and the entire weight of downtown Pittsburgh. The wood was old, dark with age, covered in coal dust and mineral deposits. Rails for mine carts ran along the floor, rusted away to almost nothing, barely visible under decades of accumulated dust. And beyond the main shaft, Branching passages led deeper into the earth. A labyrinth, most of it unmapped. My sonar equipment was heavy, 40 pounds of electronics packed into a waterproof case mounted on a collapsible tripod. I'd hauled it down the ladder in stages, taking my time, being careful. One slip would destroy $20,000 of equipment and potentially kill me. I set up in what looked like a main junction chamber, a place where 3 different tunnels intersected. This would be my reference point. I'd map the 3 passages radiating out from here, get a sense of the overall structure, then move to secondary locations if needed. The chamber was large, maybe 30 feet across. The ceiling was supported by thick timber beams, hand-hewn with axes by miners who'd been dead for over 100 years. I could see the axe marks in the wood, individual strokes visible even after all this time. I powered up the sonar unit and began calibrating. The machine sent out pulses of low-frequency sound, below human hearing range, around 15 hertz, then measured the echoes that bounced back from the surrounding rock. By analyzing the return signals, timing them precisely, measuring their strength and frequency shifts, I could map the voids, the passages, the empty spaces in the earth. The display screen glowed blue in the darkness, a topographic map building in real time as the sonar pulses swept through the mine. I watched the data populate, line by line. Tunnel to my left, 47 feet long, ending in collapse. Dead end. Tunnel ahead, 93 feet, then a branch, possibly connecting to a deeper shaft. Tunnel to my right, continuing. Depth unknown. This was the one I'd need to explore physically after getting the sonar baseline. I was humming the theme song. 3rd verse, the bouncy part where the tempo picks up and the horns come in. That's when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, not a slow cooling as I descended deeper into the earth. This was instant, like someone had opened a freezer door in front of my face. The temperature sensor on my helmet, a small digital unit mounted next to my LED lamp, had been reading a steady 58 degrees Fahrenheit since I'd descended into the mine. Standard underground temperature for this depth and latitude. Cool, but not cold. Comfortable with a jacket. Now it read 15 degrees. My breath clouded in front of my face, thick, visible puffs of steam that hung in the dead air. I stopped humming. The silence was absolute. The kind of silence that presses on your eardrums and makes you hear your own heartbeat. I checked the temperature sensor, tapped it, checked the battery. No error message, no low battery warning, no moisture short. The unit was functioning normally. It was reading 15 degrees because the air temperature had actually dropped to 15 degrees. In 3 seconds. The air itself had changed. I could feel it against my exposed skin, my face, my neck where my collar didn't quite meet my helmet strap. Cold. Not refreshing cold. Wrong cold. Ancient cold. The kind of cold that existed in places where warmth had never reached. Deep earth cold. The cold of absolute zero approaching. I looked at the sonar equipment. Condensation was forming on the steel case, droplets running down the sides collecting at the base. But not uniform condensation. Just on one side. The side facing the tunnel behind me, the tunnel to my right. I turned slowly, shining my helmet lamp into that passage. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating timber supports and exposed rock and shadows. The shadows were wrong. Too dark. Too solid. Like they were made of something heavier than absence of light. The condensation on the sonar case was freezing. I could see it happening in real time. Water droplets turning to ice, spreading across the steel in delicate crystalline patterns. Fractal geometry. Beautiful and terrifying. Frost forming where none should exist. But only on one side. Only facing that tunnel. Like something cold was radiating out from that direction. Something so cold that its mere presence was sucking heat from the air, from the equipment, from my body. I couldn't see anything in the tunnel. My light reached maybe 80 feet. Beyond that, just darkness. But I knew. I was not alone. Something was back there. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that made the temperature drop by 40 degrees in seconds just by its presence. My hands were shaking. I tried to think rationally. Temperature inversion. Cold air sinking from a higher passage. A draft from an unknown ventilation shaft. Natural phenomena. Explainable by geology and physics. The sonar equipment suddenly activated on its own. I hadn't touched it. I was standing 5 feet away, my hands in my pockets trying to keep them warm. The display screen flared to life, brighter than before. The sonar pulses began firing automatically, rapid-fire mode that I hadn't programmed. I could hear them now, deep, subsonic thrums that rattled in my chest. Too loud, way too loud. The pulses weren't supposed to be audible at all. They were below human hearing range. But these were audible. More than audible. I could feel them. Physical pressure waves that made my teeth vibrate, that made my vision blur with each pulse, that made my internal organs shift and resonate. And the sonar wasn't reading rock anymore. The display showed something impossible, a return signal, not from stone or empty space, from something solid, something large, something organic. 30 feet away, in the tunnel behind me, something that was moving closer. 25 feet. The sonar couldn't identify what it was. The return signal was wrong. The density readings were off scale. The software kept throwing error messages, trying to categorize what it was detecting, failing. 20 feet. The frost on the sonar case spread, ice forming in razor-thin filaments that grew like living things, reaching out. creating patterns that looked deliberate, geometric, mathematical, too regular to be natural crystallization. 15 feet. I could hear my own heartbeat now. Too fast, hammering against my ribs so hard it hurt. Fight or flight response fully activated, adrenaline flooding my system. 10 feet. The temperature sensor on my helmet was reading 8 degrees now. My fingers were going numb. My face felt frozen. I couldn't feel my earlobes. 8 feet. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't even turn around to look. Just bolted. Left the equipment. Left everything. $20,000 of surveying gear. I didn't care. I just needed out. I sprinted through the tunnel toward the wooden ladders, my helmet lamp bouncing wildly, throwing crazy shadows. My boots slipped on the uneven ground, on century-old rails, on rocks and coal dust and God knows what else. I could hear something behind me. Not footsteps, not movement in any conventional sense, just a presence, a displacement of air. The sound that silence makes when something enormous is moving through it. A sound like negative noise, sound being absorbed rather than created. I hit the ladder and climbed, hand over hand. Didn't look back. Couldn't look back. Splinters drove into my palms from the old wood. I didn't care. Pain was irrelevant. Only escape mattered. I made it to the surface, burst through the basement door, slammed it behind me. Stood there in the abandoned department store, gasping, shaking, my breath still clouding in the air even though it was 60 degrees in the building. I went home. Didn't file a report. Didn't call my supervisor. Just drove home in a daze, took a scalding hot shower that lasted an hour, and sat on my couch staring at nothing until the sun came up. 3 days later, when I finally had the courage, or maybe when professional obligation overrode terror, I reviewed the sonar data. The unit had a recording function. Everything it measured was automatically logged to an internal memory card. I pulled the card, downloaded the files to my laptop. The sonar data showed exactly what I'd seen on the display. A large object, solid, moving through the tunnel, approaching my position. But the detailed analysis software provided more information. Size estimates, mass calculations, surface composition analysis based on return signal characteristics. The object was roughly 7 feet tall, 4 feet wide, mass approximately 400 pounds, and the surface composition analysis identified it as organic matter, not rock, not metal, not any known geological material. Tissue. The sonar had identified the return signal as consistent with dense, organic tissue. But there was also audio. The sonar unit had a microphone for recording environmental noise, used to filter out interference from machinery, traffic, anything that might affect the readings. It recorded continuously during operation. 5 hours of audio. The entire time I'd been down there. I played it back with headphones, sitting at my desk in my home office, morning sunlight streaming through the windows. I heard myself entering the mine, setting up the equipment, the clang of metal on stone, the calibration tones of the sonar, my footsteps echoing, and my humming. That stupid sitcom theme song, clear as day, echoing through the mine shaft. The humming continued for 42 minutes, through my initial survey, through the temperature drop, through the activation of the sonar. Then the audio cut out abruptly, not a fade, not a gradual loss of signal, just instant silence. 15 seconds of absolute silence. No background noise, no ambient sound, not even the hiss of electronic interference. Just nothing. And then my humming started again. But it was wrong. The song was playing backward. Every note reversed. Perfect. Clear.
Not slowed down, not distorted, just reversed.
Like someone had taken the recording and played it in reverse at normal speed. I stopped the playback, checked the audio file properties. No corruption, no data errors. The file was intact. This was the actual recording. I played it again. The backward humming continued for 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The melody was unmistakable, even in reverse. I could identify the tune, but the rhythm was alien. Wrong. It made my skin crawl in ways I couldn't articulate. And then, at the very end, cutting through the final backward note with perfect clarity, was another sound. The distinct, metallic click of a key turning in a lock, a deadbolt sliding home, the mechanical sound of a lock mechanism engaging. I wasn't near any doors when I recorded this. I was in a mine shaft 60 feet underground. There were no locks, no doors, no mechanisms. But the sound was there, clear, undeniable. Someone, or something, had locked a door. And based on the audio positioning, the direction analysis the software could perform, that door was between me and the exit. I quit my job 2 days later. Told them health reasons. Didn't explain, didn't go into detail. Just submitted my resignation and stopped answering calls. I took a job doing office work, data analysis for an insurance company. Above ground, climate controlled, fluorescent lights everywhere, the constant hum of air conditioning and computers and human activity. I haven't hummed that song since. Can't even remember how it goes. When I try to recall the melody, my mind goes blank, like the memory has been selectively erased. But sometimes, late at night, when the office is empty and I'm working overtime, I catch myself humming something else. A melody I don't recognize. Notes that don't follow any conventional musical scale. Backward rhythms, reversed time signatures. And when I record myself on my phone to prove it's just my imagination playing tricks, because it has to be my imagination, right? The recording is always silent. Except for one sound. Clear and distinct, and impossible to misidentify. The sound of a key turning in a lock. Every single time. If you made it this far, thank you for watching. These stories are documented accounts filed away in caving incident reports and geological survey archives. 7 people who walked into the earth and came back, changed. I've got more stories like this. Real horror. The kind that doesn't need jump scares or gore because the truth is terrifying enough. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and remember, some places were never meant for human beings. Stay safe out there, and if you ever go caving, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, get out. Because the earth is patient. It's been here for billions of years, and sometimes it remembers things we've forgotten. Sometimes it's waiting.